you. There's nothing better than stuffing people with pasta and cookies and then introducing the historian, who's going to try and talk to you about history. I will tell you that I'm a historian for Oakland County. So what the heck am I doing in Macomb County? Well, you know, we're right next door. And one of the things that I've learned is that our histories are interconnected and they're intertwined. And a lot of the work I do is about preserving and saving pieces of land in Oakland County. And one of the things I've learned is that the way to save a piece of land is to learn about why it's important, to learn about its history. So I was invited by my colleague, Donna, to try and research this piece of land. I said, oh, I love a challenge. It's not in Oakland County, so I'm going to enjoy that. So that's what I came to do. I've been working on that, trying to understand this piece that you're trying to say. So let me begin by saying, where do you begin when you work on a piece of land? I say you begin at the beginning. And wherever you're at, anywhere in the Great Lakes region, your beginning begins here. Anishinaabeg Aki, the land of the Anishinaabe. Wherever you are in Michigan, you were at one time on Anishinaabe land. And that's important to remember, because it's not just Native American history, it's our history. So now, if we think about the Anishinaabe, who were they? They belonged to a large group of what we call the Algonquin speakers. They shared a language, a similar language. If you look at the red, that's all all Algonquin-speaking people spread across. This is just at the time Europeans will come. So there were many related groups. Some of them you probably studied in school. The Powhatan. Remember Jamestown? The Powhatan will save the people of Jamestown. The Wampanoag were the people who helped the Pilgrims. And you probably heard of the Cheyenne and the Shawnee. They're all related to Michigan Native Americans, Algonquin speakers. Now, once the Anishinaabe are here in the Great Lakes, they will divide into three big groups, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe. They call themselves the Three Fires Confederacy. They were related. The best way to think about them is this. We are nations whose languages are similar, whose cultures are close, and whose lands are often shared. So those three groups, people sometimes say, oh, there was a village here in Romeo. What was it? Was it Ojibwe or Potawatomi? And I'll say, you know, we don't know. It could have been a combination of the three. Now, what do we know about the culture? They moved in a seasonal pattern. As the resources change, whoops. Uh-oh.
It's okay.
There I am. I'm back. I'm back. So what did they do in the summertime? They had a summer village, usually out on the coastal area, where they grew plants, corn, beans, and squash. And they harvested berries. And then come fall time, they would go to where they would harvest their crops in their village, and then they'd go to where there's wild rice. And they'd fish, particularly lake sturgeon and whitefish. And they'd smoke it for wintertime. And then in wintertime, they'd break up into smaller groups and head into the forest where it was more protected, and they could do ice fishing and they could do hunting. And then in the spring, maple sugar camps where they would make maple syrup and maple sugar, and they'd also plant the summer crops. And they'd move in that cyclical pattern. And that helps us understand what they might have done here in this area. But how far back are we talking? Let me take you to an archaeological site. Here we are right there. That's where Romeo is. Right here, down here, is Sterling Township. And in Sterling Township, there's a historical marker that marks the Holcomb site. It's one of the oldest sites of human habitation in Michigan. It's dated at being 11,000 years old. Think about that. That is not far from you. 11,000 years people have been moving through this area. And then if we come closer to you, here we are, and up here, right near the border of Bruce Township, is this archaeological incredible piece. It's called a circular enclosure. It looks like this. It did at one time. They've been destroyed in Michigan. This one's in Ohio. Notice the raised area in a circle. Here's a better picture. Notice back there. And then the circle had 3 gateways to it. Now think about that. In your 1885 county history, it said it was a fort. Wait a minute. If you have a fort, do you want to have 3 ways to get into it? I don't think so. These weren't forts. We've learned more about them. These were celebration, gathering areas, where people would come from many areas to a place where they would trade, and they would celebrate, and they would share. Here's the cool thing. There's also a burial area that was once here, burial mounds. You can see it was located right along the northern branch of the Clinton River. But here's what's cool. That's unique in all the state. But right down here, there was another one. That's on the edge of Armada and Bruce Township. Another one with burial mounds. But wait a minute, closer to you here. Right there, section 25, a mile and a half from here, there was another one, a third one. The only place in Michigan we know of where there were 3 circular enclosures so close together. That's amazing. But you had more. Right here, a significant Native American trail that cut through, came up from the south, headed over to Lake St. Clair. Now, if you read the early non-Indigenous settler diaries, here's what they say. We came out by the Native American trail, by the Indian trail. And right here, this was a Native American village. We don't know much about it. Could have been a winter hunting camp, might have been an established village. We're not really sure. But look at the indigenous history you have. So when you think about your piece of land that you're trying to protect here, you want to think about there's indigenous history on that land. It goes way back before the middle school was there. So you want to think about how are we going to celebrate that? And then, of course, what will happen? At one time, all Michigan was Anishinaabe land. But then, starting right here, 1795, we had the Treaty of Greenville. That little piece was ceded away. Watch what's going to happen in the next 50 years. All of it will be gone. By 1842, all that was left of indigenous land was 32 square miles. Think about that loss of land. Now, how did that happen? Well, we know it was a process of treaties, but what about treaties? No treaty was willingly signed by the Anishinaabe. They were coerced and forced to sign treaties. Nobody wants to give away their land. They were also hugely complicated. Look at the treaty here. And what language were they in? English, not Anishinaabe-Moan. So they couldn't be read easily. And here's the biggest problem. Indigenous people and non-indigenous people viewed land in 2 different ways. Let me have someone tell you, I think she's one of my favorite authors. She's Citizen Nation Potawatomi. And here's what she said. In the settler mind, land was property, real estate, capital. But to our people, it was everything. Identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home of our non-human kinfolk, our pharmacy, our library, the source of all that sustained us. It belonged to itself. It was a gift, not a commodity, so it could never be bought or sold. Now, when you have different views about land, you come to the treaty process with different ideas of what's going to happen. Here's the way I like to think about it. I go to Costco and I buy a big, juicy ham. It's a commodity. But I have a carved wooden music box that plays the Blue Danube. that my dad gave me when I was 5 years old. Why? Because my Croatian grandparents grew up along the Danube. Now think about that. Which one am I going to take better care of? Which one am I going to value more? Which one am I going to pass on to my granddaughter, Elizabeth? So different ways to view land. So that acreage that you're trying to save, you need to think about it as a gift, not a commodity. And now what's going to happen during the treaty process? Starting in 1815, we started to map and survey the Michigan territory. Surveyors came in and they divided it up into townships, 2 of them here. There's Bruce and here's Washington. And then, I'm just waiting, it's hard to talk over people. Sorry, but people who are still chatting, it's a social event, I know that. But a church like this, the sound is just booming up there. Makes it hard to hear. So I appreciate it if you could hold down your chatters so that I can talk a little. Okay, that's quieter. That's quieter. And now what they're going to do is divide the townships up into sections, 36 of them, so they can sell it, so they can put it up for sale. What will happen here in Romeo? You essentially, your history will begin with 4 little 80-acre pieces of land. The very first one will be bought by Asahel Bailey. He will come from New York and he'll buy 80 acres. And then the next one, big surprise to me, because that was purchased by Lewis Cass. Raise your hand if you know who Lewis Cass is. Yeah, he was the territorial governor at the time. He bought the second piece of land here. Never lived here. He sold it. Why'd he buy it? He said that place has promise. He bought it as an investment. And the last 2 pieces went to Job Hoxley, who bought 2 pieces. Now, when the map makers came in and made the maps, they named the settlement after him. You'll see here, Hoxley Settlement. And it will kind of stick. Both of the early map makers called it that, but the people didn't hear. The people who were here called it what? Indian Village. And that would stick. In fact, in 1827, when they got the post office here, it was the Indian Village Post Office. It was approved by the federal government. It is the only incidence where a non-Native American settlement was called Indian Village. What a cool thing. I don't know quite why, but people did that. They must have been connected. So were there Native Americans still here in the 1820s? Yes. According to your 1905 history, a settlement was forming, and several families of Indians lived there and 2 or more white families. So your history begins with Native American people here also. Where'd the name Romeo come from? Well, that wouldn't be till 1830. And that was Laura Taylor, N.T. Taylor's, the store owner's wife, who came up with the name, and she said, oops, sorry. It was short, musical, classical, and uncommon. And you're right, it's the only Romeo in all of Michigan. But she will name it. And then what will happen? A bunch more people will come in. You probably recognize some because you got roads named after all of these people. You got streets there. Where were these people coming from? Many of them were coming from New England, Massachusetts in particular, even more coming from New York. And they were making their way into the Michigan territory. And why? Because land was expensive in New England and New York. Land here was $2 an acre, and then it was lowered to $1.25. Imagine now. And so people were flocking here. The Erie Canal opened and people were coming here. And what did they take with them besides grandma's teapot and their favorite quilt? They took their belief in education. The New Englanders and New Yorkers were strong believers in the power of education. In fact, in your 1885 history, it says, the people of Romeo have from the earliest times paid attention to education matters. A love of education formed a leading characteristic of the people. It has always been fostered and cherished by them. That was your beginning, and it's who you are today. You're here celebrating a piece of land that's history is based on that love of education. Now, in 1827, 2 years before you had your first store or blacksmith shop, you got a school. And people said the Indian Village School District resolved that they were going to take subscriptions and build a school. Subscriptions like we're doing tonight, donations. And those people worked together and they literally built your first school. And within 10 years, they needed a bigger school. And they built this one on the same spot. This is so cool because that building is still here. It's down on Church Street. Talk about holding on to history. You guys are good at that. You got to keep doing that. And then in 1833, 5 years before they expanded the school, they said, we need a secondary school. I've never encountered in 1833 anybody that wanted a high school. People were happy to have a one-room school that went to grade 5. Not the people here. They formed a corporation, went to the state, the territorial legislature and said, we want to build a school, and the legislature approved it. Didn't give them any money, but they said, go ahead and do it. And they did. And they went and got Ornan Archer, who was running a school in Utica, New York, and said, come start a high school in, at that time, what is now Romeo, Michigan. And he would start it in the Congregational Church. The first Congregational Church. We're sitting in the third one, by the way. He will start that high school there early on. And then came the Panic of 1837, described as a financial crisis that set off a depression. Now, this was a tuition-based school. Nobody had any money. And so, essentially, by 1839, the academy closed. But it was your first school. It was important, first high school. And then Nathan Dickinson, he stepped in and said, we're not giving up so easily. We're going to have our high school. And he went to people and said, we've got to do it again. We can do it again. We'll come back after that depression. And he heard that the University of Michigan was looking for towns that wanted an academy, and they were going to fund the academies, little high schools. Romeo applied and became one of only 8 of the 17 to get approved. And you got a University of Michigan branch, a high school. U of M said, we want to make sure they're prepared to come to college, so we're going to fund these little high schools. And then Rufus Nutting. He was hired to run your first U of M academy. He was a professor at Western Reserve College in Ohio. He happened to be this brother of Gat Chamberlain, you might have heard that name in your history, of his wife. So he knew someone here, and they wanted him, and he came. Who made up his teaching staff? His mother, his daughter, and his son. So it was a family affair. Now, he will start his school in the 2nd floor of your primary school. But then, he heard that the Congregational Church was going to build a new church. They wanted to build it in the same area. It would eventually, in 1842, look like this. But they put their building, this one, up for sale. So Rufus Nutting purchased it. And he moved it across the street, right there. We're very close to that area. We're sitting in that spot. And he began what was called the Romeo branch of the University of Michigan. Well, now think about that. How early that was, that you had that here. A little while later, he would move it down here, where 200 Church Street is now. Now, there's a newer house there, but that's where that U of M Academy was. Now, when he left, Charles Palmer and Betsy Palmer, his wife, took over the school, another husband and wife team, and they will run the academy for a while. Look where their students came from. They came from all over Michigan, a lot from Oakland County, by the way, and New York, Massachusetts, Ohio, and Canada West, which is what Ontario was at that time. They came from all over. Your academy was very, very famous. But then in 1851, the University of Michigan said, this is getting expensive. And they withdrew funding. And sadly, once again, that academy closed in 1852. But here's what happened. The directors and friends of education in Romeo and vicinity have resolved to take the matter entirely into their own hands and found an institution. They have given of their abundance and purchased a new and beautiful site, and they have erected a large and commodious building. Delightfully situated in the beautiful village of Romeo, a flourishing place, distinguished for the general intelligence and morality of the inhabitants. Oh, you're still that group, aren't you? That's what's so cool. It's still that same kind of flourishing place. And once again, they would buy a piece of land from Nathan Dickinson, and they would build an institute. Here was the large, commodious building. And what did they name it? They named it the Dickinson Institute. He sold the land for cheap, and he put in $1,000. That was 1/3 of what the building was going to cost. He essentially funded 1/3 of it himself. Now, I found Nathan Dickinson was an interesting character. I could do a whole evening on him. One thing I learned, he was related. He was a cousin of one of my favorite poets, Emily Dickinson. But here's something cooler. He's related to Taylor Swift. Yeah, I found that out. Now, I am not going to tell you that story. I'm going to make you go to one of your own websites, the Romeo Community Archives, where you will find out how Nathan Dickinson is related to Taylor Swift. Now, he'll be replaced by Isaac and Julia Stone. Isaac Stone grew up in Ray Township. He was a local guy. And then he went to Oberlin College and came back, and he and his wife ran the Institute. And then 1867, a big change. Michigan itself, as a state, was not funding high schools at this time. And they started in the 1860s. So some people in Romeo said, wait a minute, this is a tuition high school. The state will let us have a public high school. And so there was pressure on the Institute to replace it with a public school, and that's what happened. The Institute would turn into Romeo High School, a union school, and now it was a public school. And in 1885, it would build this cool building. It was located right next to the Dickinson Institute. Now people said, we really don't need that old building anymore, so what's going to happen to it? It went up for auction. They put it up for public auction, and John Sewell bought it for $27. Took out what he wanted, and then he demolished it. Oh, it was gone. It had similar curriculum to the other academies. It had a classical, an English, and a college preparatory course. And you have some wonderful old photos. This is the laboratory. You have photos of the inside of the school. Very lucky. Usually all you have is the outside. Here's the library. Here's something to think about. You have some of the best historical resources I've ever seen on schools. You have this book, A History of the Romeo Community Schools. It's this thick. It is fascinating. Text and pictures of diplomas. And then you have this. How many have seen that book, the Images of America Romeo book? It's jam-packed. Here's your best resource, Emily. Where's Emily? Yeah. Right back there. You are the only community I have ever worked in, and I work in more counties than Oakland, that has their own archivist. You are so lucky. So you have stuff here. What do you want to do with your stuff? When you get that piece of land, and I know you're going to get it, you have got to think about interpretive signage. How are you going to take that open space and have signs that will tell its history? You've seen some historical signs. These are the Michigan ones. They're incredibly boring, aren't they? Aren't they boring? Look what we're doing now. Oh, I'm going to read that one. It's got photos. This is Motor Cities. You've got one here in Romeo. I'm going to stop and read that sign before I read the other one. So you want to think about what kind of signs are we going to have? And then the people. Here's Omar D. Thompson. He became principal of the high school in 1876 and did that for the next 25 years. A high school principal who can do it for 25 years? Oh my gosh, think about that. That's a hard job. Oh, and Carolyn Kimball. Carolyn Kimball in 1898 helped Romeo establish one of the first high school art courses that any high school ever had in Michigan. And then look at these teachers. You've got pictures of them. And here, 1908 students, 1910, 1912, the girls' basketball team, 1916, the entire student body. And here, the teachers from 1917, the football team from 1925, the graduating class of 1925. And then in 27, you needed to add on again. So you built this huge, huge addition right next to the old building. And then, more pictures. The choir of 1937. Oh, the orchestra of 1937. The basketball team of 39. The had graduating class of 41. And then you expanded. You purchased this building. At the time it was a school, but it was built as a home, a big home, by none other than O.D. Thompson. The little area in front, that road was called Thompson Place. And he built a house right there. I think I know why. He wanted to walk to school. He wanted to walk to work. Now, eventually, it would become a private girls' school called the Maples. And then the district would buy it. In the 1950s, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade students were there because the primary school had run out of space. And then it was used as a cafeteria for a while. And then, in the late 1960s, it became a warehouse. Here's a cool picture, 1952. There's the school on the right, and then here's Thompson Place. And then back here in the trees, there's the house. It wouldn't be till 1980 that the house was demolished when it needed a lot of work. By the way, that Thompson Place, that roadway, it's still visible on the land you're trying to get. And then, 1958, the new high school would be built. And that's when this became the Romeo Junior High. And then in 66, that one part of that building was getting old and you needed new modern buildings, and so what happened? That was demolished in 1966. And then that was left, and of course, additions to the north and to the south, and a building that didn't look quite like that big commodious structure anymore. In 97, what would happen? It would become the middle school. Now, I don't need to bring you pictures of that. A lot of you have those pictures in your head. You also have two wonderful videos I found. I love these. A personal tour of the high school by one of the teachers of the middle school, and then the one called The Last Walk. And why was it the last walk? You know, because that building in 2021 was demolished. That's the one we're thinking about tonight so much. And that becomes your problem and your challenge. How do you hold on to the history of a building that's no longer there? It becomes tricky. It becomes tricky. Now, you have some stuff to help you. In the hallway, I hope you saw that big, ugly copper box. That was a time capsule. When the building came down, it was located in the cornerstone of the 1927 edition. It's filled with treasures, including a handwritten note from 1839 that was written by Asahel Bailey. He was attesting that Miss Allen was qualified to be a teacher. And then in 1932, the Monday Club, the Romeo Monday Club, tried to hold on to history, and they dedicated this big boulder with the names of the 3 schools that were gone by their time, they were trying to hold on to history. Now, what do you have the chance to do? You have the chance to extend what that boulder was meant to do. You have the chance now to do the same thing, but to do it in a bigger way, to do it with a piece of land, not just a rock. You have the opportunity to extend what they were trying to do by working together to, first of all, get that piece of land and then to thoughtfully develop it. How are you going to interpret it? How are you going to share the history, the green space? How are you going to create something that you will want to pass on? And constantly, I encourage you to keep in mind, that little piece of land is like my wooden carved music box. It's something to hold on to and pass along. Whatever you do, remember, what you're looking at is not a hand. It's a music box. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carol. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to share with Carol?
Are the archives at the Romeo Community Archives that Emily is the archivist for over there? This is how easy is this to access those records over at the Kezar Library?
Oh, it's pretty easy to access the items. Yeah, it's really easy to access the items. All you have to do is make an appointment, and the Kezar Library is open Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., Fridays from 10 to 6, and Saturdays from 10 to 2. And it's really amazing to have all those collections. And it's not just this school that we have the information for. We have like the land that's surrounding it and other collections, including the First Congregational Church, the church that we're in right now. So we're here to preserve everything that is associated with Romeo, as well as Bruce and Washington Township.
Thanks, Emily. So thank you so much, Carol. I mean, we all feel the love and appreciation, but I think what we learn is to listen to the land, and that this is a gift that we want to hang on to for our children.